One of the most stupendous miracles of the latter days took place in 1917 in Fatima, Portugal, when over 70,000 people witnessed the miracle of the sun, a stupendous prodigy promised by the Mother of God to the people of that time. I'm Julius Smetona. This is what Catholics believe. Fatima has fascinated men in the 20th century, especially something called the third secret of Fatima. It was given by Sister Lucy to the Pope in the Vatican in the 1940s. It was never made public until recently. For years there was much speculation on what the message contained. Now we know what at least part of it says. With me today to discuss the third secret is Father William Jenkins. Father Jenkins is a priest who has remained loyal to the traditions of the Church and celebrates the traditional Latin Mass exclusively. Father, before we go into this third secret, maybe you could just tell us a little about, some of the viewers may not be terribly familiar with it, with Fatima itself. What were some of the things that transpired? What were some of the things that were said and communicated to men, and what happened as a result?
Well, Fatima is a small locale in Portugal, and ordinarily I guess this little area would have attracted no attention, but for the fact that there were some children, 3 little children in the area who had a vision of our Blessed Mother. They were tending their parents' sheep in 1917 in May, and an angel came and spoke to them, and then the Blessed Mother herself came and visited with them and ordered them to return to that spot on the 13th of each month because she had something to reveal through them. And word spread through the village, and then through the entire nation, and finally through the continent, and even throughout the world, so that by the time the last apparition occurred on October 13th, 1917, there were over 70,000 people who were either in Fatima itself or nearby to witness the great miracle of the sun. That was Our Lady's promise, that she would make it absolutely clear that the children were in fact receiving messages from her and from heaven.
You know, this great miracle of the sun, there's pictures of it which are available. I think the Library of Congress of the Smithsonian Institution has pictures. I've seen them myself. In fact, I think in the 1950s, Life magazine had some reproductions, and it was the pictures I remember seeing were this huge mass of people in the rain, and then the next thing, they were on their knees on the ground and all looking skyward, and you saw pictures that they captured of the sun, which looked in an eclipse position and literally dancing around in the sky. That is generally not known today, but it was probably a stupendous prodigy. And the interesting thing is that when the people got up, even though it had been raining literally for days and they were in a field of mud, everything was completely dry and clean.
They were dry and clean, and tens of thousands of people gathered there on October 13th, 1917, despite the rain, despite the mud, many of them having trudged through miles and miles of mud to get there from distant villages, coming in by ox cart. There were even some of the noble families of Europe represented there on the basis of the word of these 3 children. And lo and behold, they saw suddenly the sun, as Lucy said, seemed to detach itself from its place in the sky and begin to whirl around, casting off shoots of colors in every direction. And suddenly the sun, after this kind of dance, as it was described, spiraled, plunging toward the earth.
Exactly.
And all of the people who had been staring at the sun all of this time and all of this splendid display were terrified, and they all buried their faces down, and they were all, suddenly this vast crowd was prostrate in the mud. And then a few minutes later, when they came to and they looked, the sun was back in its place in the sky. They were bone dry. The ground was bone dry. They were not caked with mud. They all stood up and they realized they witnessed a stupendous miracle. It was reported by the world's press at the time.
Over and above the miracles, some of the messages that were transmitted through Sister Lucy, who is still alive, as a matter of fact, one of the 3 messengers who's still alive, My recollection is, one, it predicted the spread of communism, and that Russia would spread her errors, and at 1917 Russia was not taken seriously on the world stage. Predicted the end of the First World War, and then indicated that there would be a second, more gruesome war to follow if people did not reform their lives. Said that the way people dress, certain fashions would be introduced that would be very offensive to God. Said that many marriages were not pleasing to God. Maybe you could just touch on some of these, because it would give us a bit of a perspective. Here we are in the beginning of the 21st century, where things have changed a great deal, but already back then in 1917 she was talking about offensive fashions in marriages which were not pleasing.
Well, as at Lourdes in France in 1858, Saint Bernadette's reception of visitations from the Blessed Mother were sealed by the cures of the waters of Lourdes. So the miracle of the Son sealed the revelation to these three children. And what Our Lady spoke to these three children was really addressed to the entire world. The primary revelations of Our Lady to these children, private revelations, took place in July of 1917. And these were known as the three secrets of Fatima. The first two secrets were revealed early on, but the third was kept a secret until very recently. Some, in fact, say that the third secret still is secret, even though the Vatican has claimed to reveal it now. There are many who doubt that the Vatican actually did come forth and reveal the third secret.
Well, it certainly seems very different, because the first two are very, very concrete and tangible.
Well, I have the
third
text
is very
of it.
mystical.
I can actually read what has been stated here about the third secret of Fatima. It says here, Sister Lucia, in the third memoir of August 31st, 1941, made some statements about the first and second secrets of Fatima, and then made some annotations further on this in the fourth memoir of 8th of December, 1941, and this is what she said. She says the first part of the secret is the vision of hell. Our Lady showed us a great sea of fire which seemed to be under the earth. Plunged in this fire were demons and souls in human form, like transparent burning embers, all blackened or burnished bronze, floating about in the conflagration, now raised into the air by the flames that issued from within themselves, together with great clouds of smoke, now falling back on every side like sparks in a huge fire, without weight or equilibrium, and amid shrieks and groans of pain and despair, which horrified us and made us tremble with fear. The demons could be distinguished by their terrifying and repulsive likeness to frightful and unknown animals, all black and transparent. This vision lasted but an instant. How could we ever be grateful enough to our kind Heavenly Mother, who had already prepared us by promising in the first apparition to take us to heaven? Otherwise, I think we would have died of fear and terror. And then she goes on and talks about the continued revelation. She gets into the second secret. We then looked up at Our Lady, who said to us so kindly and so sadly, "You have seen hell, where the souls of poor sinners go. To save them, God wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart. If what I say to you is done, many souls will be saved, and there will be peace. The war," remember the First World War was going on then, "the war is going to end. But if people do not cease offending God, a worse one will break out during the pontificate of Pius XI. Of course, Benedict XV was Pope during the First World War. There was no Pope Pius XI.
That's interesting. She actually said Pius XI.
She named him.
Wow.
When you see a night illumined by an unknown light, know that this is the great sign given you by God, that He is about to punish the world for its crimes, by means of war, famine, and persecutions of the Church and of the Holy Father. To prevent this, I shall come to ask for the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart, and the communion of reparation on the first Saturdays. If my requests are heeded, Russia will be converted, and there will be peace. If not, she will spread her errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions of the Church. The good will be martyred, the Holy Father will have much to suffer, various nations will be annihilated. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me, and she shall be converted, and a period of peace will be granted to the whole world. And these are the first two secrets of Fatima that were, as I said, revealed early on. There's a lot in here, a tremendous amount, and as we look back over the past century, we can see the fulfillment. As you say, at the time these words were spoken by Our Lady to the children, Russia was negligible. The whole idea of Russia spreading anything throughout the world was preposterous. And people would scoff at that idea, but lo and behold, shortly after this revelation was given, the Bolshevik Revolution took place.
In October of 1917.
And suddenly Russia was on its way to becoming a world power in a very, very
My grandmother actually saw the sign in heaven in the late 30s, and it was kind of like a blood-red cloth almost. It was visible in much of Europe. People try to explain it away as some kind of a manifestation of the aurora borealis or something like this, but it wasn't like that. And shortly there, it was very eerie and chilling and disturbing, and shortly after that, World War II began.
Some people question why Russia would be so pivotal in this whole question. And I've heard it explained to me by a priest who came from that part of the world, that the people of Russia have always been very devoted to the Blessed Mother. I mean, the iconography of Russia centers upon the mother and child. The Madonna is very, very much a figure of love and respect in Russia. And perhaps Our Lady has kind of adopted the people of Russia in a special way and wants to deliver them from the power of godless atheism. Some would say that she's already done this because of the glasnost and perestroika that took place in the 1980s. That's not the case, though. Russia still remains very much under the influence of diabolical force. You know, in commenting on the excuse me, on the third secret of Russia, of Fatima, Malachi Martin had some interesting things to say, and I know we haven't gotten to the third secret yet. We're just talking about the first two secrets. But nonetheless, he ties them all together. And he does this even before the third secret was supposedly revealed.
Now, he apparently was privy to the third secret before it was revealed, and he said he was not able to disclose its contents.
He did know the third secret of Fatima. He said he did. And there are those who have spoken with Father Malachi Martin. Some of you might be familiar with him. He was a Jesuit. He was an advisor to 3 popes in the Vatican. And he left the Jesuits when they became so liberal. He always remained a priest in good standing, though, and toward the end of his life he was offering only the traditional Latin Mass every day. And on Sundays he would go from locale to locale within New York and offer the traditional Mass for various families he knew. He died back in 1999. Some say of a stroke. But he published some remarkable books. He was a Vatican insider, and he had a lot of information. One of those books was published in 1990. It was called The Keys of This Blood. And it was subtitled The Struggle for World Dominion Between Pope John Paul II, Mikhail Gorbachev, and the Capitalist West. Gives you an idea about the politics that he's going into. You know, Father Malachi Martin created quite a sensation in revealing some of the things he did in his quasi-novel form of writing. And some of the most amazing things he had to say, I find, in this book, The Keys of This Blood. I've talked to some people who spoke to him about the third secret of Fatima at a time when it had not yet been revealed. And one lady who was at one of his talks told me she asked him about the third secret of Fatima. He acknowledged knowing what it was. And when she asked him what it said, he told her, well, I can't reveal it to you, but all I can say is imagine the worst possible thing you can think of and then multiply it times 10. And to someone else, actually a gentleman in the media in the Cleveland area who knew Father Malachi Martin, he said he asked him about this third secret, and he said he couldn't reveal what it had to say because it was shown to him under the secret, the seal of secrecy. But he said in the process of showing him the third secret, the cardinal who had it pushed it across the desk to him and said, "We have just condemned millions of people to death." That was the introduction. So when you read what he has to say about it in The Keys of This Blood, you can see that some of the background that he's speaking of.
Given what you've said, and we'll get to the third secret that's been published thus far, it doesn't seem that it's complete because it's very mystical and not too terribly gory, what has been published, and it doesn't sound like anything about condemning millions of people to death. In fact, it's kind of very distinct from the first two, which had many specifics and concrete things, whereas this one is just very, how should I say, symbolic almost, and not that concrete, at least what's been revealed thus far, if it is in fact only partially.
Well, that's true. The third secret was supposedly revealed in part. The first glimmer of it was given by Cardinal Sodano, who was the Vatican Secretary of State. He revealed it May 13th of the year 2000. And he just alluded to it, saying he had permission to do so, and he said it had to do with the Pope being wounded and recovering. But in fact, when the third secret appeared on the Vatican website, it had nothing to do with the Pope being wounded and recovering. It said explicitly a Pope was going to be killed, and killed not just by one, but by a group of soldiers. It talked about executions. In fact, I have a copy of the third secret as it appears on the Vatican website here, and I could read that.
Okay.
And when you compare this, as it is revealed by the Vatican, with what Father Malachi Martin has to say and what others like Father Nicholas Gruner have to say about it, then you realize, well, there's something missing here. We're not getting the entire story.
You're watching what Catholics believe we're talking about, Father Jenkins.
Well, Julius, I thought I'd read the third secret of Fatima as it was on the Vatican website.
Okay.
It starts with the words of Lucia. "I write in obedience to you, my God, who commanded me to do so through His Excellency the Bishop of Leiria, and through your most holy mother and mine." And then she continues, "After the two parts which I have already explained, at the left of Our Lady, and a little above, we saw an angel with a flaming sword in his left hand, flashing. It gave out flames that looked as though they would set the world on fire. But they died out in contact with the splendor that Our Lady radiated towards him from her right hand. And pointing to the earth with his own right hand, the angel cried out in a loud voice, 'Penance, penance, penance.' And we saw in an immense light that is God," something similar to how people appear in a mirror when they pass in front of it, "a bishop dressed in white. We had the impression that it was the Holy Father." She said later she didn't know what Holy Father it would be, because this was obviously a future prophetic
1940s,
vision.
right, as she wrote it.
Well, actually, the vision occurred in 1917,
right.
So they really didn't know who it would be. She said, "We had the impression that it was the Holy Father. Other bishops, priests, men and women religious, going up a steep mountain, at the top of which there was a big cross of rough-hewn trunks as of a cork tree with the bark. Before reaching there, the Holy Father passed through a big city half in ruins, and half trembling with halting step, afflicted with pain and sorrow, he prayed for the souls of the corpses he met on his way. Having reached the top of the mountain, on his knees at the foot of the big cross, he was killed by a group of soldiers who fired bullets and arrows at him. And in the same way there died one after another the other bishops, priests, men and women religious, and various lay people of different ranks and positions. Beneath the two arms of the cross there were two angels, each with a crystal aspersorium in his hand. Aspersorium is a sprinkler, in which they gathered up the blood of the martyrs, and with it sprinkled the souls that were making their way to God." Now, this is all that we're given as the text of the third secret. And Cardinal Ratzinger even admitted, well, there'll be many who will be disappointed that this is all there is. And actually, there are many who are very skeptical that this is all there is because of things that were said over the previous 20 years. Even John Paul II alluded to this third secret of Fatima after he was elected. And this conflicts with the official rendering now we have of the series of events that took place, because now we're told that after John Paul II was shot, he called to see the third secret of Fatima, because he suspected that it had something to do with his being shot. But we're told by others that John Paul II saw the third secret of Fatima before he was shot. He actually had seen it early on, in the earliest days after his election. So there are already conflicts about the sequence of events here. There were many who were disappointed with this third secret, and claiming that this is part of the third secret, but certainly not the entire third secret. Part of it is being kept back. Why? They don't know why it's being squelched. If you read the summer 2000 issue of the Fatima Crusader of Father Gruner, you see there are various experts on Fatima who are making the case that we're being deceived. Part of the secret of Fatima is being suppressed. If you read what Malachi Martin wrote in The Keys of This Blood, you'll see that there apparently is much more to it than we're being told.
Why would it be suppressed?
Well, perhaps for the same reason that John the 23rd refused to reveal it when he was supposed to in 1960. You know, Our Lady told Lucia that this secret was to be revealed in 1960 by the Pope at that time.
That's interesting.
John the 23rd saw it, and we're told by those who witnessed his reading of it that he simply put it back in the envelope, said it does not apply to us, it is not necessary to disturb the faithful with these things. And then the secret was salted away. There were others who knew of it, though. The Bishop of Leiria certainly knew it, as Lucia delivered it to him, first of all. And others became aware of it as time went on. Ratzinger allegedly saw it, and in fact he comments on it, and he contradicts Lucia's own words. Lucia said that this is a prophetic vision, and he says this does not pertain to anything, a future revelation, or anything prophetic. So there are contradictions. Even when the Vatican revealed it on its website, there was strange things about it. Why, for example, the Vatican would reproduce there the Portuguese handwriting of Lucia, I understand is the pronunciation Portuguese, unless they expected that people would suspect there was something wrong or something missing. It was as though they were trying to shore up the revelation against future criticism. But it probably is being kept back because it pertains to them. As Father Martin wrote in his book, John the 23rd had an ideal opportunity to carry out Our Lady's command, to consecrate Russia to her Immaculate Heart in union with all the bishops of the world when he had the bishops gathered for Vatican II. Instead, he suppressed the secret. He refused to do what Our Lady had asked him to do, and he took off on this great adventure of Vatican II, which has brought the Church so low.
You know, that's really a kind of a striking thought, and which might even be beyond comprehension for many Catholics, how a believer, a pope, who would have an apparition which the Church recognizes and would have part of its message delivered to him with a mandate or a command to make it public, and he refused to do so. That is chilling, that he would take it upon himself to make that kind of a determination. Now, maybe some people would say, well, he's the Pope, he can do that. Would that apply?
Well, I mean, he obviously had the freedom to do that, and he did it. Whether it was right or not is another question. John the 23rd was certainly a modernist. He was a partisan of what Pope Pius X, St. Pius X, called the gathering of all heresies. He started the Church in a direction which was totally antithetical to everything she had taught and professed before. And we are living in the aftermath of what he started, a revolution. The fact is that Pope Pius XII did consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. This was in the mid-1950s. That's a fact, he did. And but he did not do it explicitly in communion with all the bishops of the world. John the 23rd was the first to have the opportunity while the bishops were gathered there
For Vatican II.
for Vatican II, and he refused to do it. So he certainly has a very big responsibility.
You know, what's interesting is, granted, there's some controversy which shrouds the revelation or the publication of the Third Secret, but in spite of that, there is still so much in the Fatima message which can apply to everyone today. And maybe, Father, you can briefly just touch on that. What did Our Lady say, which is very concrete and should be put into practice by the faithful of today and people of goodwill who are in the world today?
Well, Julius, to answer that question, let me read from the Keys of This Blood, Malachi Martin's book of 1990. So I think he says it very, very well. He says on page 630 of that book, the actual contents of that third secret remained by and large a secret until the pontificate of John Paul II. By that time, the contents had been revealed to a sufficient number of people on a private basis, and both John Paul himself and Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger had spoken with sufficient frankness about the contents so that at least the essentials could be reliably outlined. And then he goes in to explain what those essentials are. Lucia's single-page written formulation of the third secret covers three main topics: a physical chastisement of the nations involving catastrophes, man-made or natural, on land, on water, and in the atmosphere of the globe; a spiritual chastisement far more frightening and distressing, especially for Roman Catholics, than physical hardship, since it would constitute the disappearance of religious belief; a period of widespread unfaith in many countries, a central function of Russia in the two preceding series of events. In fact, the physical and spiritual chastisements, according to Lucia's letter, are to be gridded on a fateful timetable in which Russia is the ratchet. The chastisements were meant to punish the nations for their ungodliness and abandonment of God's laws. The whole dire process could be averted, need not happen. In fact, if two requests of Mary were granted: one, that whoever would be Pope in 1960, actually it was John the 23rd, should publish the text of the third secret for the whole world to read and know; two, that then the Pope, with all his bishops acting collegially, should consecrate Russia to Mary. Russia, according to the text of the third secret, was the regulator of the timetable. And he continues, if those two basic requests were satisfied, then the two chastisements, physical and spiritual, would not be inflicted on mankind. Russia would be converted to religious belief, and a period of great peace and prosperity would ensue. If the requests were denied, the chastisements would then follow as surely as night follows day. Russia would spread its errors throughout all nations. Many millions would die. The practice of religion and the profession of true faith would diminish to a shadow of what they were.
Well, Father,
widespread corruption would infect the Church's clergy. This is the hardest part to read. Widespread corruption would infect the Church's clergy and laity. The Holy Father would have much to suffer. A little glimmer of hope existed. In the end, after all this dreadful devastation, there would be a restoration of faith and tolerable living conditions, as though up until that time the conditions of life would be intolerable.
When you hear this, you think, my goodness, talk about a crime against humanity, of failing to do this. These are the conditions and you would avert this. But you know, Father, when they're talking about Russia's been converted, one chills when there was a remark by Yeltsin, do not forget, people of the West, we still have nuclear weapons, that they have by no means diminished their ability to vaporize the United States, for example, and that in spite of this fact, President Clinton just recently refused to sign and go ahead with a shield, a deployment and development of a shield that would protect the United States from nuclear war. With respect to the corruption of the clergy, all one has to do is read the daily newspapers and no further comment is necessary. The glimmer of the shadow of the faith, who even believes today?
Well, Martin says that John the 23rd's refusal of those two requests of Mary have been followed by a great falling away. He says already whole sections of the Church in France, Austria, Holland, Germany, Spain, England, Canada, and the United States, and Latin America had fallen precisely into unfaith. He said there subsisted, and this was in 1990 he wrote this, there subsisted only a faithful remnant of practicing Catholics. Now, this is Malachi Martin's report in 1990. And he says this was the result of John the 23rd's refusal to reveal and then act on the third secret of Fatima.
You know, to the extent that, and I don't see any reason why people would think that Father Malachi Martin is not being reliable or credible, especially that this is 10 years before the revelation of the third secret. It seems it's not even close, what they revealed. It's not even close.
Indicates there's a lot more to what was said. And of course, Malachi Martin died and never lived to see the revelation of what the Vatican said.
That's interesting, too.
And that makes me wonder if that's not why the Vatican waited and revealed it now, because he knew. And he could have said, and would have said, this is not the third secret, at least it's not all of it.
And Sister Lucy knows, but she's a cloistered nun, and she's 90 years old, and she's not for her to make public pronouncements like this.
Let me finish, actually, this section of Malachi Martin, because he has a paragraph in here that I think is absolutely amazing. I think it's astounding. What I think is even more astounding is that there was not a worldwide reaction to what this man writes in this book. Now, hundreds of thousands of copies of this book were circulated in the world. The bestsellers, you know, Malachi Martin authored bestsellers.
Sure.
Listen to what he says in page 632. Most frighteningly for John Paul, he had come up against the irremovable presence of a malign strength in his own Vatican and in certain bishops' chanceries. It was what knowledgeable churchmen called the superforce, quote unquote, in the text. Rumors, always difficult to verify, tied its installation to the beginning of Pope Paul VI's reign in 1963. Indeed, Paul had alluded somberly to, quote, the smoke of Satan which has entered the sanctuary, end quote, an oblique reference to an enthronement ceremony by Satanists in the Vatican. Besides, the incidence of satanic pedophilia, rites and practices, was already documented among certain bishops and priests, as widely dispersed as Turin in Italy and South Carolina in the United States. The cultic acts of satanic pedophilia are considered by professionals to be the culmination of the fallen archangel's rites. He's talking about an irremovable, malign strength in the Vatican. Some people are not terribly surprised about an evil force strength in the Vatican and in many chancery offices. But they ask, how can this be irremovable? And the answer, I believe, can only be because they have so completely watered down the faith or denied it, destroyed the sacraments, they've done away with the order of exorcist, that they can't get rid of this power because they don't have the power to do so.
Well, it's very interesting. It sounds very similar to what Pope Pius XI said about communism, and he referred to the apostles tried to exorcise the spirit of the devil from a man possessed, and they were unsuccessful. And our Lord said, this is not cast out, these type, except through prayer and penance. And certainly what we've seen in the last 30 years has totally de-emphasized and almost ridiculed prayer and penance, and has made it a religion of convenience and a religion of this world. You've been watching